we are saying hello. Feel free to join us anytime you want. Yeah, let's start. So we are supposed to speak about the L2 Endgame, so let's regroup and see where are we at. It's been almost 4 years. I checked it this morning since Vitalik's post about rollup-centric Ethereum rollup, and I read the post again. And I think that some things have changed since the original post, and we came a long way since that time. And I would like to ask all of you, from your perspective, what is the current approach to scaling to the next billion users and trillions of transactions? Especially that each rollup, each L2, already became its own ecosystem, and it's scaling in itself. So how do you see the current approach to scaling through rollup-centric rollup?
Yeah, I think actually what you just said, I think is exactly kind of how I see things. The first few years of rollups was really about kind of getting kind of teams started, like people just like figuring out what are the very basic kind of ingredients for having a rollup. Basically, you have to have your entire own chain. You have to not only have the chain, you have to build your ecosystem. Basically, just the very basics. I think we're basically now at a point where that phase is basically complete. You actually have each of these rollups now has an ecosystem. They have their chain running. They're getting more and more green segments over on L2 beats. Like the fundamentals are like starting to come together. And I think now we are starting to see more sophistication or more focus on actually thinking about the specifics of, hey, a layer 2 is not just a copy of the base chain, right? Like actually layer 2s have their own kind of design trade-offs. And if we want to start thinking about scaling, I don't think we have seen much scaling yet. Like, of course, you can say that just having instead of one chain, having multiple small chains, that's already a form of scaling. But I think actually there's a long ways to go. I think individual rollups can scale a lot, but for that you have to actually to start really thinking deeply about what it means specifically for layer 2 to scale and what different trade-offs they have to make versus the base chain and everything. And we're starting to see really roadmaps for that emerge and people to take that more seriously, which again, you couldn't do before you had these basics. You have to take the first steps before you can take the second steps. But I think we're really at this transitionary moment in time.
Thank you. Togrul, how does it look from your side?
I think I would like to say that I think I personally naively, when I started working on rollups, there were certain things that I underestimated the complexity of and naively thought that it would be solved relatively easy. And specifically, there are two things. One is sequencer decentralization. I don't know why. I think in around 2020, it was always in my head that, yeah, if we want to do it, we can do it in like a month. It's not that difficult. Just slap on a consensus, call it a day, that's it. Just go. And the second problem that I think is even more difficult to solve, that I also personally underestimated, is multisigs and how to deal with multisigs. Because again, I just feel like, okay, yeah, whatever, at some point your code becomes relatively stable and it's battle tested and you're fine, yeah, just remove the multisig. But now that scroll has around 200 million TVL, I'm like, oh, do I want to remove it? I'm a bit scared what happens if there's a bug. And I think for Arbitrum, it's even a bigger problem. Arbitrum has what, around 20 billion TVL, so imagine the effort and the self-assuredness it takes to actually remove that multisig just like that and call it YOLO. So I think those are two things that there are certain improvements in both of them, but those are the two things that I personally, looking back, underestimated quite a bit the complexity of, and hopefully soon we'll get improvements of both of them.
So I think a while back, Steven Goldfeather, the founder of Off-Chain Labs, tweeted something about if you want to onboard next billion of users, we need to onboard next million of developers. And the reason he said that is that developer needs to build good product to attract the users. And I think for us, the reason we are really, really bullish about the stylus tech stack is that that will allow Web2 developers to start using language like C, C++, to start building in the crypto world, right? Like if you look at a Solidity developer, the number of it is very small compared to the entire Web2 developers, or now even AI's developers. So I think that's a really big step. And with stylus, we can also welcome builders from Solana or blockchains that with smooth languages to build on Arbitrum. So I think that's our initiative to onboard more developers and start bridging some of the gaps between fragmented developer resource and liquidity.
Let me do a follow-up question, which was not on the list, so this is a surprise. Because, like, you know, it seems, when I remember when I first looked at L2 Bit, like, you know, there were like, I don't know, I could count those L2s on, you know, on two hands. And right now, it seems like, you know, everyone and my grandma also want to have their own roll-up. What do you think? Like, how is it going to be going to develop? Like, I know that Arbitrum has a strategy of having, like, somebody was laughing in Denver for 2025 orbit chains for 2025. Like, how is it going to will we have like thousands of rollups, thousands of chains? How do you see it?
I think we'll definitely see a huge hype of blockchains. A lot of projects are building their own chains now because the meme is too strong. But personally, I think in a few months, this will die down. A lot of projects, they just don't need that much block space. Crypto is such a small group of people. Some projects have like 10 daily active users every day, and then they want their own blockchains. I think eventually people will start realize that they don't really need that much block space. What they need is interoperability. What they need is the liquidity, which is incredibly hard to bootstrap if you have your own chain. So I think this is a journey that the entire industry or layer twos have to go through together to first build a bunch of them and then realize we don't need them.
Toggle, what is your point? Like, are rollups new ICOs?
I actually made a joke a few months ago, and I said something along the lines of L2 SDKs is where irrelevant L1s go to die. Because like you can see it all the time. It's like all the L1s that have not achieved anything by now, they're like, oh yeah, how do we reinvigorate ourselves? Oh yeah, we're now L2s. Let's use Polygon CDK or OP Stack, whatever it is, or Arbitrum Orbit. Let's transform into an L2, and now we're like, yeah, now all of a sudden we become relevant. I actually think I would agree with Nina. I think it's just a fad that is going to die down. I think certain applications I can see why you would need your own block space, but for a lot of them it's just a justification to revive an irrelevant project or to just launch something that they can do a quick cash grab on and then move to something else. So yeah, I don't know. But also I hope for your sake that we don't get 1,000 rollups, because I can imagine how difficult your job is going to be once we get to 1,000 rollups.
Yeah, Ansgar, now how from your perspective, like how EF is going, like looking into that, you know, Cambrian explosion of different chains and having thousands of rollups?
EF is just going to YOLO it.
Yeah, I mean, of course the EF is just going to YOLO it because there's no EF. You know, like it's just like, we have individual researchers and some have opinions and I have opinions. But yeah, maybe my opinion is a little bit different. Like I would make the distinction between different tech stacks and then the individual chains, right? With an SDK, sometimes you have one tech stack and like 50, 100,000 different chains using the same tech stack. I think what we will see and keep seeing is a Cambrian explosion of the actual different tech stacks. Like initially we basically just had a few different approaches to getting like strictly EVM equivalent chains. Now we're seeing all these SVM chains, move chains, whatever chains. Like we see people experimenting with high throughput EVM chains that are no longer EVM equivalent, right? Like I think that makes sense just because we are starting to understand the kind of trade-off space for layer 2s more, and there is more sophistication in like going into the different niches. I think long term, as these evolutionary processes usually go, like we'll figure out the 1, 2, 3 approaches that make the most sense. Everything else will die out or find small niches to survive in, right? And then in terms of once we have figured out what the best tech stack is, how many, like will we end up in a world where it's like one big one or like 10 big ones, or is it like going to be 10,000 small ones? And that one, honestly, I just think we'll have to see where the tech goes. I don't think it matters so much on it, because either we find really good ways of operating, right? Like for example, the way you can have a high throughput rollup is either you have one big virtual machine that runs at 100,000 TPS, or you just have 100 chains that run at 1,000 TPS and you just somehow bundle them together. I don't think it matters, honestly.
Ansgar, I have an important question for you. Which SDK would you recommend to launch my L4 with?
I mean, obviously, you know, whatever, but like, if you ignore the L4 in that sentence, I think in a couple of years that answer will be clear, right? And there will be one that makes the most sense. Why not?
Yeah, fair. I don't know. It's difficult for me to say.
Okay. You raised a very good point about like this, you know, having thousands of different standards, different frameworks, and by scaling it this way, we secured the position of being the chain, like the crypto chain of the world. However, we also introduced fragmentation. You mentioned liquidity fragmentation. There is also usage fragmentation, and our competitors, and I will not name names. They don't have to face it. Like they
Does it
YOLO.
start with S?
They just YOLO
That's
with
Olana?
Yeah, so they just YOLO with increasing those outputs. So how are we, speaking of L2 Endgame, how are we going to deal with this fragmentation in the short term? Like not sometime in the future, but right now.
You can use local terminology for it. You just bridge and inshallah. I think there are two ways of looking at it. One is asset fragmentation, and other is standard fragmentation, in a sense that every single, and you know that better than I do, every single bridge of every single L2 is defined and built in a completely different way. And I can imagine what a nightmare it is for like bridge builders or wallet builders in order to be compatible with all of them, how much work it takes to actually be compatible. And I think the first step into solving this fragmentation would be to introduce some kind of a bridge standard, because I think from there we can create certain constructions that would allow assets to move faster, and we just need the underlying. So essentially Ethereum needs something like an IBC, but for rollups. I'm not sure how I would call them, and I'm not sure how it will work, but yeah, I think we need something like that to start even attempting to solve the fragmentation that currently exists.
I completely agree. I have nothing to add there. We need standard.
Yeah, maybe. So I would say my default assumption would just be, and that's what I was saying earlier, like difference between tech stacks and chains. I think default assumption would just be that we'll have very few tech stacks winning out, and then just standardization by default. If everything happening in Ethereum is just inside different OP stack chains in the superchain, or scroll chains, or Polygon chains or whatnot, like they will internally be standardized. I think in order to make it that we don't end up in that world, we would need to find a really, really good interoperability solution across heterogeneous layer 2s, which we might or might not. I honestly don't know. We will see. I don't think the default case would be that outcome. But I also think in terms of, you said, like how can we with this fragmented ecosystem compete with other ecosystems? And I feel like that's the wrong lens. Like when I think about Solana, just to name the name Solana, like I don't think the Ethereum ecosystem competes with Solana. I think Scroll competes with Solana, Arbitrum competes with Solana, Polygon competes with Solana, and of course the reason why Solana, if you just look at that one-on-one, of course Solana has more traction than each individual one of those, or like I don't know, at least most of the individual ones. But that is just because building a layer 2 is such a new thing, and basically the getting off the ground is so much harder. We are past the step now, and I think now we will see like a lot of these layer 2s individually being able to compete much better, and then that we get these synergy effects within the entire ecosystem. That's just on top. That's an extra nice benefit that we'll get on top, but it's really about the individual competition in my mind.
I just wanted to add, are you just like passing all the responsibility to us now?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, yes, that's exactly what the rollup-centric movement is about. Like minimum viable functionality on the base chain, and then it's your responsibility. Like literally, I want to just lean back. I want to just never touch the chain again, and you all have to make the Ethereum ecosystem win. Like that's literally your role.
So I'll just paraphrase it. I want to live a relaxed life and not stress at all, and you deal with all the pain.
Yes.
And that actually brings us very smoothly to the third question, because we're in another cycle, this type of cycles, And we kind of, last years were all about building infrastructure, and it was, it was understandable. We had to build all those things. It was hard. We were experimenting, but we've waited kind of long enough. I think that right now we are at the stage that the infrastructure is maybe not ready yet, but almost ready. We are almost done with everything. If you look at L2 Beat, everything is almost green already. But we are at the stage that we need to go mainstream. Like, we need to actually bring users, bring liquidity, bring everything on chain. How to do it?
I think you brought me back to 2017 with that almost there. It's like sharding is almost there. Proof of stake next year. Promise. It's the same thing. Actually, no. I think I would agree that we're almost there, or almost there. I don't want to put too much expectations on our shoulders. Well, Ansgar would love to do that, but I don't want to take that much responsibility. No, I'm just kidding. I think we solved a lot of the fundamental problems that we had. Like, for example, I remember chatting to Alex, who was supposed to be here, but he rugged us. 3 or 4 years ago, when there were rumors going around that Jordi from Hermes at the time was trying to build a ZK VM, and Alex was like, the way they're building is impossible. They're never gonna do it. And the tech improved so much that now we have 3, 4, 5 ZK VMs already live in the mainnet, and more coming out soon. And that was one of the most fundamental problems that we were trying to solve. I think from now on, we just have 2 remaining problems. As I said in the beginning, how do we deal with the multisig, and what do we do with sequencing? Once we solve that, I think we're off to the races.
Thinking about that, I remember sitting at FCC when Jordi was explaining, for the first time presenting the ZK EVM. I was sitting next to Bartek, and we were like, come on, we are expecting that it will take at least 3 years to get there, and it's already there. But yeah, let's get back to the topic. How do we get these mainstream users using our technology?
Parallelization. We parallelize EVM. That's how we do.
That's specifically, I think, the wrong question, because the wrong answer, because it's no longer about that. We have a good technical roadmap. We're not at the end of the technical roadmap, but at least we know kind of roughly the direction. It will take a couple more years. But at some point, I think everyone in the ecosystem is in the ecosystem because we really, truly believe that blockchain have this potential to be super valuable for the world. So far, they are not. They're just not, right? And that's fine, because when the internet was just chat rooms where you could be a cat and chat with an elephant, that was not actually adding value. That was fun, but not adding value. And trading meme coins is fun, but not adding value. We are actually getting...
So much value.
It's so much value. We're getting to a point where the tech stack is ready, and now we actually have to prove that our, that our belief that this is actually valuable is right? If 5 years from now we're still sitting here and we're like, oh, it's almost ready, and just you wait, mass adoption tomorrow, then we failed. And especially if we 10 years from now we still sit here and we're just like, yeah, the users will come, just you wait, now we actually have to prove out that there is actual demand, that this can actually turn into useful products. These useful products couldn't be used by 1 billion users tomorrow, but they could be used by 1 billion users in a couple of years. The tech will be ready. We have to now actually get to proving out that there's demand for this.
I'll actually would like to pretend to be Ansgar here and say, oh yeah, we've built the tech, guys, so it's now the responsibility of the devs to actually build cool apps on top of it. You see, now I'm passing responsibility to someone.
You're not there yet. In 3, 4 years, you can be like that.
Why are you so pessimistic? Why 3, 4 years? No, I agree. I'm just joking.
Nina?
I think actually the timeline aligns quite well. The tech will take another year or 2. If you look at the regulators, you look at the traditional finance, fintech company, every time they 5 steps forward and 3 steps backward. So they are not moving faster than we are. So that kind of aligns. But in terms of Arbitron, we have Franklin Templeton, we have Robinhood. So we are experimenting this with them, trying to understand how we can, how our technology can be better with what they have been doing for the past 100 years. So it's definitely a collaborative initiative, but we're holding hands with, educating them small steps at a time.
Okay, we still have some time, so we have time for my reserve question. And this reserve question was actually, kind of like in our L2Bit's interest. Because like right now we've got those dozens of L2s, and as we already mentioned, we are expecting to be hundreds, if not thousands of them. And, it's obvious that not all of them will be as restrictive, as rigorous about security and as cautious about the user funds as you are, as Scroll and Arbitrum, all the others that were meant to be here with us. So I'm wondering, like, how do we deal with all those different, strange constructions that will be showing off? How do we make sure that, people don't YOLO into that and we lose as a whole community, as an ecosystem, when people lose money into them?
I'm going to share my 2 cents. I think we need to have some centralized entity like L2 Beat to start educating developers and users of the risk of interoperability between different layer 2s and rollups. Then this could be bridge risk, this could be sharing the same tech stack. I just don't think there is enough analysis to be done as of today, because all of this layer 2 rollup hype only happened for the past like 2-3 months. I think that's the first step. And second is, I think all the rollups should be putting a resource to analyzing where funds flows from rollup to rollup, aka monitoring actively how money flows from one chain to another, so that when in the times of emergency, we have a very clear picture of what happened in a very short period of time. So that's my answer to it. I think we have a lot to be done in terms of that. And I will throw the hard question to the other panelists here.
Togrul.
Hello, hello. Can we start by agreeing that optimiums are not L2s? Like, if we set that as a baseline, I'll agree to discuss the rest.
Actually, it's a pity that Alex is not here, because we've been discussing this with him in Denver quite a lot. I would say that discussions are happening.
I know. I've been on 2 Twitter spaces with Luca arguing that optimiums shouldn't be considered L2s. So if we set that as a baseline, I think we already have a good threshold for security there. Another thing, I don't know. I just feel like the more L2s become commoditized, the harder it will be for us, or you specifically, to explain to people what makes a secure and a not secure L2. Because I remember a couple of years ago when Metis did their off-chain DA thingy, and they still were trying to claim that they're a roll-up, and everybody was just repeating it. So it took the willpower of the entire community to convince everyone that they're not actually a roll-up anymore.
I actually, incidentally, I checked today that they are still under review on our assessment.
It's been 2 years.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, because one thing I forgot to mention, that one thing is that we will be calling out all those different systems, and we are actually waiting right now for some roll-ups to even improve even more in terms of maturity, so that we can actually diversify how we present different systems, to present them, to show those that actually do care and commit to security, and those that maybe not so much. But I'm wondering, Ansgar, how to approach it. Something that I've heard in Denver, somebody was shilling, one person was shilling to another, Orbit chain that settles to base with Celestia SDA and Espresso shared sequencing. How do we assess it? How do we actually, figure out what to do with that?
That's a proper L2, I can tell you straight away.
Wow. Okay, I don't want to talk about the specific case, but in general, okay, well, yeah, my personal opinion. Like in general, the way I think about it is, I have some base trust that, in general, there are good teams out there that are trying to actually build proper systems, right? And like, if we make it easy for them to do that, and like I think, for example, L2 Beats has done just like an invaluable job in just basically clearly like just making it very clear for users and developers of the systems alike, just what the categories are, what to focus on, and like what checkboxes you basically have to tick to actually be on the right path. But I think ultimately this only gets us so far. If the payoff for cutting corners is too high, people will inevitably cut corners, and users will flow to the systems where people cut corners. We've seen this time and time again, right? And I think we have to make sure that the cost for doing the right thing is not too high. We have to make sure that the technical kind of the difficulties for getting there is not too high. We have to make sure that, for example, also with DA, that safe DA is cheap enough that it's not literally like an insane business decision to use safe DA. All these kind of things, we have to make it as easy as possible, and then I do think the people will do the right thing.
Can you please raise the gas limits?
What do you need to raise gas limit for?
Because when you decentralize, it's more expensive to settle on chain because you need to post more data and do more execution on chain.
So do you want more cheaper data, or do you want cheaper execution?
Cheaper execution.
Cheaper execution, well, that's a tricky one. Possibly.
Please.
We can negotiate offline.
I can see someone's there is already unhappy with what I'm saying.
Yeah, there is this initiative to pump the gas.
Let's not pump the tokens, let's pump the gas.
Yeah. So we are at the top of the hour. I'm out of questions, but I think that we can, we can reward someone from the audience for sitting with us to the very end. So if anybody has any question, I think we have at least time for one. Anybody? Yep. Yeah. Gentleman there. Can we get him a microphone?
Hey, I asked this question before with the Arbitrum Orbits talk, and I'm just curious about, or more curious about interoperability with like layer 3s and layer 2s. I'm already with a layer 2, right? Like if I want to call into Uniswap or some other kind of smart contract, that contract needs to be deployed in the layer 2 that I'm trying to access, right? If we now move up a layer to a layer 3, how does that picture or how does the story in terms of interoperability like unfold, right? All the way up, and then you guys are joking with like layer 4s. So like what is the vision for interoperability? Are we becoming more restricted and limited in terms of what you're able to access as you move up these layers? Will there be more overhead in terms of now organizations having to deploy to multiple different layers and different chains? Yeah, like what kind of like pain points do you guys see with these like added layers?
Sorry, is the question about, can you briefly summarize the question? I didn't think I get it.
Right. So like right now, for example, if you want to access Uniswap on like Arbitrum, right, or another layer 2, that Uniswap contract needs to be deployed on that layer 2, right? You can't just leverage the Uniswap contract that's on layer 1. As we move up to like layer 2s, layer 3s, how do I access, for example, Uniswap or some other kind of smart contract, right? You take your pick of smart contracts as you're moving up to these layers, right? So if I have a layer 3, how do I access another smart contract that's not on my layer 3, that's perhaps on like a layer 2? Does that make sense?
Let me rephrase it because like the audio is pretty bad and we don't hear, to be honest, much from what you're saying.
Yeah.
But if I understand correctly, you're asking about interoperability between those different chains, especially if we've got, it's already a problem with layer 2s, but if we got another layer 3s, so how, for example, we use a thing like Uniswap with this fragmentation, which we've been
exactly, it's a fragmentation problem, right?
Anybody wants to refer to that?
Nina, I'll pass the question to you.
So I think I briefly give the answer in my presentation that if you're building on top of Arbitrum 1 or Scroll or any other layer 2, you should obviously have a bridge between your settlement chain to your own rollup chain. So that's that. And Other than that, there's bridges like layer 0 that pretty much have act as a communication protocols between different chains. I think so far that's the only solution out there until maybe Ethereum Foundation figure out the standard for us to all communicate with each other.
It's coming back to you.
Not our responsibility, just to make it clear.
It is. He's just pretending that it's not.
Right, and that's the question too. Like, what are the pain points? So now there's going to have to be a bridge between every layer 3 and every kind of smart contract that becomes unwieldy. Like, how do you see that becoming a problem for people as they're developing now on these layer 3s?
I mean, I will say that I think there's a very big difference between interoperability within one rollup ecosystem and across heterogeneous ecosystems. And that's what I was saying earlier. Of course, it's always easy to say it's a solved problem when in practice there's still a lot of work to do. I think it's a solved problem for interoperability if it's a homogeneous tech stack, right? All the different kind of copies or versions of an SDK of a rollup system or something, they'll figure out how to do good interoperability. What's much harder is how do we interoperate across all these different individual ecosystems, and that I think is an open problem. As these things go, no one cared about this 2 years ago. Now people care, so now everyone focus on this. This means a lot of smart people will have a lot of great ideas. So we'll make progress, and then we'll see how far we can push that. I don't know. You have something smarter to say?
I want to emphasize that it's the two problem is of different scale, right? To have everybody interoperable with everybody else is 1,000 times more difficult than having based on one protocol wanting to have interoperability with another chain, right? If you just want to be interoperable with 2-3 chains that you want to, then there's obviously a solution for that. But if you want everybody to be interoperable, then it's a way longer game plan and way longer discussion than it needs to be. But I don't know, as of today, I don't see anybody needs to be interoperable with everybody else because they really need it. I don't see that demand as of today.
Right. And I mean, being interoperable with everybody else is another story, but being interoperable with specific contracts, right? That's something that I think a lot of contracts may want to be able to call into Uniswap or some other kind of smart contract. Composability is a thing, right? And crypto and blockchain. So if I decide to deploy a smart contract on an Arbitrum Orbit layer 3, but I can't call out to any of these other smart contracts like Uniswap again, for example, doesn't that kind of limit my? I mean, one that's going to be very limiting, right? For my contract, I would have to choose to deploy on a layer 2 where Uniswap is already deployed. I guess my question is more of if these things are ready, right, and we're there per se, or we're almost there, there isn't, how is that being answered? How are we allowing people to be able to have that composability, right, but up on these higher layers? Does that make sense?
Excuse me, I will wrap it up. Sorry about it, because we didn't hear anything at all, to be honest. So sorry about it. Let's put it, outside. I'm quite surprised that nobody mentioned shared sequencing. Togo, last chance, mention it.
I was just gonna say that when you're talking about interoperability within a single stack or an ecosystem, it's easy. It's only easy if you have shared sequencing, and at least from all the current proposals, I haven't seen a very viable model. I'm still not very bullish on shared sequencing as a whole.
Yeah, I've got a feeling that this will be actually the main theme of the next conference next year. It seems like that this is coming soon. Thank you very much for sitting with us until the very end. Please give a round of applause to our great guests.
Thank you.
Let me, at the end, shamelessly shill that if you want to look into any, specific attributes of those rollups, go to l2bit.com. And thank you very much for being here.
Optimiums are not
Thank you, everybody.